Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is June 29th. On this day in 2014, 5-year-old Nathan O'Brien vanished from his grandparents' home in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Alongside him, Kathryn and Alvin Liknes, Nathan's maternal grandparents, also disappeared. What began as a family sleepover turned into one of Canada's most heartbreaking crime stories. Their disappearance triggered the longest Amber Alert in Canadian history and unearthed a twisted tale of vengeance and violence. Today, we remember Nathan, Kathryn, and Alvin and explore the layers of betrayal and brutality that forever altered the lives of two families and shook an entire nation. Let's get started. The last weekend of June 2014 should have been filled with love, laughter, and memories for the Liknes family. Alvin Liknes, 66, a retired oil executive and self-styled inventor, and his wife Kathryn, 53, a caring grandmother and former nurse, were closing a major chapter in their lives. They were downsizing their Calgary home as they prepared to move to Edmonton and eventually to Mexico for retirement. Over the weekend, they held an estate sale at their Park Hill neighborhood home. People came and went, friends, former colleagues, even people that they hadn't seen in years. But the highlight of the weekend was a special visit from their grandson, Nathan O'Brien. Nathan was a vibrant 5-year-old with a shock of blonde hair and an infectious smile. He loved superheroes, puzzles, and anything involving his grandparents. That Saturday night, June 29th, Nathan asked if he could sleep over, and his parents, Jennifer and Rod O'Brien, said yes. At first, they were going to stay over too, but when their younger son Max woke up crying, they made the decision to let Nathan stay while they returned home. Nathan was thrilled. He curled up on the living room couch under his favorite blanket in the safety of his grandparents' home. No one imagined that it would be the last night any of them would be seen alive. The next morning, June 30th, Jennifer returned to the house to pick up her son. She expected the usual greeting, Nathan bounding to the door, maybe mid-story about his adventures with Grandma and Grandpa. Instead, she found silence. The house was locked from the outside, and that alone raised questions. Inside, the scene didn't scream alarm, but something was off. Dishes were still in the sink. Nathan's blanket was draped over the couch, but there was no sign of life. No Kathryn, no Alvin, and no Nathan. Jennifer called out. She searched room by room, and then she saw it. Blood. Not a lot, but it was enough to get her heart racing. There's a smear along the wall and droplets near the stairway. And then, worse still, a tooth on the hallway floor. She recognized it immediately. It was her little boy's. It was Nathan's. Terrified, she called the police. What started as a wellness check spiraled into a nightmare. Within hours, Calgary police were combing through the Liknes home, piecing together what they quickly determined was not an accident and not a disappearance. It was a crime scene. But there was no sign of forced entry. There were no broken locks, no shattered glass. However, there were clear signs of a struggle. Bloodstains were found in the hallway, on the staircase, and in the garage. A dumbbell smeared with blood lay tucked behind storage bins. Drag marks indicated that bodies, plural, had been moved. Forensic teams later confirmed that biological evidence belonging to all 3 victims was present. And that small tooth, that image would come to haunt the entire country. That very day, June 30th, an Amber Alert was issued for Nathan O'Brien. The alert stretched across Alberta, then into British Columbia and Saskatchewan. It would eventually become the longest-running Amber Alert in Canadian history. As the country watched, Calgary grieved. Nathan's photo was everywhere, on TV screens, storefronts, and billboards. Volunteers poured in to help search. Jennifer and Rod O'Brien made heart-wrenching public pleas. "Nathan, we love you. We will find you. You are our superhero," Rod said, barely able to speak through his emotion. But as days passed and no one came home, hope began to dim. The public mourned even before the truth was known. Behind the scenes, investigators had begun to connect the dots, and a name emerged: Douglas Garland. Douglas Garland was not a stranger to the Liknes family. At 54, he lived on remote acreage in Airdrie, north of Calgary, with his elderly parents. He had no job and no family of his own, and few, if any, friends. But what he did have was a grudge. You see, years earlier, Garland had collaborated with Alvin Liknes on a pump design for a medical device. Now, Garland, who had a background in chemistry and electronics but no formal credentials, believed that he had been instrumental in the early stages. But when Alvin moved forward with the patent, Garland's name was nowhere to be found. Though the business deal had fizzled, Garland's resentment did not. It only grew over the years. When police discovered that Garland had been seen at the estate sale before the murders and had a long history of tension with the Likneses, they made him a person of interest. His past only raised more red flags. In the 90s, Garland had served time for operating a drug lab under a stolen identity. Surveillance was set up. Officers tracked Garland's movements. And then, during a routine check, there was a match. Tire tracks found at the Liknes home matched those from a truck on the Garland property. On July 4th, police brought Garland in on an unrelated identity theft charge. While they held him, forensic teams searched his farm. And what they found was horrifying. They discovered a burn barrel that was still smoldering and filled with fragments and ash. There was blood on tools, and even more disturbing, a hidden room containing restraints and a meat hook. There was also a secret compartment with coveralls that were soaked in blood, later confirmed to contain the DNA of all 3 victims. But what they didn't find were the bodies. Despite this, evidence was overwhelming. On July 14, 2014, Douglas Garland was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Garland's trial began in early 2017, and it was every bit as harrowing as expected. Prosecutors argued that Garland had broken into the Liknes home in the middle of the night, possibly while the victims were asleep. He had attacked Kathryn and Alvin first, and then taken Nathan. Investigators believe that he transported all 3 to his Airdrie farm, where he then murdered them. It was a revenge plot that was rooted in delusion about an old business deal, but the brutality that Garland unleashed went far beyond any business grievance. Evidence presented at trial included Garland's internet search history, and that included queries about body disposal, homemade restraints, and even gruesome torture methods. It was also found that he had viewed child pornography, an appalling detail that only deepened this case's horror. The forensic evidence sealed his fate. DNA from all 3 victims was found across his property. Bone fragments from the burn barrel were analyzed and confirmed to be human. Garland never testified, and he never showed any remorse. And the defense offered no explanation. The jury deliberated for less than 2 days, and then on February 16, 2017, Douglas Garland was found guilty of all 3 murders. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 75 years, the maximum sentence available under Canadian law. At 57, he would never see freedom again. Justice was served, but healing, of course, was another story. For the O'Brien and Liknes families, closure is complicated. Douglas Garland has never revealed what he did with the bodies. And despite overwhelming forensic evidence, the physical remains of Kathryn, Alvin, and Nathan have never been found. At Garland's sentencing, Nathan's father, Rod, addressed the court through tears, saying, quote, "We know what happened, but we still don't have Nathan. He deserves more than this. We all do," end quote. Jennifer and Rod O'Brien went on to found the Nathan O'Brien Children's Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping children in need. It funds programs that promote empathy, kindness, and community, qualities that Nathan was known for. Jennifer later said, quote, "We live every day to honor Nathan. He brought joy. We try to carry that with us," end quote. The foundation has helped countless kids, turning sorrow into service and memory into movement. But one question still lingers. Where are they? Garland has remained silent, and that silence remains one of the cruelties of this case. The inability to lay your loved ones to rest, to have a funeral, a headstone, a place to grieve, is a grief with no roadmap. On June 29th, 2014, a simple sleepover turned into tragedy, a story that tore through a family, a city, and a nation. But from the darkest moment came light. The resilience of a family, and the enduring legacy of 3 unforgettable lives. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found today's episode compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day, True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!